So thank you all for joining us today. I'm Sam Belknap. I direct the Island Institute's Center for the Marine Economy that, among other things, houses our work on working waterfronts and the work we've done with some of the businesses that you'll learn more about today. For those of you who are less familiar, the Island Institute is a 41-year-old community development organization that boldly navigates climate and economic change with island and coastal communities to expand opportunities and deliver solutions. And Emma, you can switch over to the next slide. But before I jump into introductions, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the devastating storms that hit our coast last January didn't just do damage to the infrastructure of our coast. It also impacted the families that run these wharves and the communities as a whole. Many of these properties have multi-generational connections to families. So the storms left their mark not only on the wharves, but on the hearts and minds of people. And as we go through the conversation today, I just want to make sure everyone recalls that many of these are more than just businesses. They are centers of the community, and the damage runs far beyond what you see in wood and steel. So with that, it is my pleasure that we are joined today by an amazing host of panelists that have dealt with exceedingly challenging situations over the last year. Joining us from Stonington, Maine, Christina Fifield is a co-owner of Fifield Lobster. Fifield Lobster is a wholesale lobster and crab dealer, buying from roughly 40 boats during the fishing season. The business has been operating in Stonington since 1940. And during that time, last January storms were the worst they've seen in their history. Also joining us from a bit further down east, Amity Chipman. Amity is the co-owner of Chipman's Wharf in Millbridge. She's part of a fifth-generation fishing family that owns the wharf. And in 2001, Amity's husband, Jason, with his brother, Chris, bought waterfront property in Millbridge and formed Chipman's Wharf. January storms washed away their 100-foot wharf and bait house, requiring the full rebuilding of their wharf and securing of the eroded embankment. Also joining us from Bass Harbor is the general manager of Thurston's Lobster Pound, Derek Lapointe. Derek, in his role at Thurston's, they buy from roughly 25 boats. They sell bait, fuel, and also operate a seasonal restaurant. January storms flooded Thurston's Lobster Pound and forced the business to quickly find ways to repair and rebuild so they could be ready for the next fishing season. And last, but certainly not least, we're joined by Lissa Robinson, who is on the other side of this equation. Lissa is a senior civil engineer and hydrogeologist at GEI Consultants' Portland, Maine office. She is a Maine native with more than 35 years of experience in New England and across the country working on projects that involve riverine and coastal waters. Lissa oversees GEI's Portland, Maine office, where 23 colleagues work on a range of projects, including particular focus on vulnerability and resiliency studies and coastal waterfront mitigation to flood and wave impacts, a critical resource for many of the businesses that we're working with today. So with that, we've asked our panelists to discuss a little bit about their experience with the storms, how the last year has gone, and where they're going from here. So I will turn it over to Christina of Fifield Lobster to get us rolling. Thank you, Christina. Christina, I think you need to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry. I'm here now. Hello, everybody. I'm Christina. I co-own Fifield Lobster Company with my brother, Travis. And like Sam said, my family has run this wharf since 1940. And yeah, I'm not, what else would you like me to start, Sam?
Sorry, I'm navigating the mute button myself. Christina,
Okay.
you can talk just a little bit about the role that Fifields plays in the community, and then like how you were impacted by the storm and how the last year has gone and the challenges that you faced and where do you think the business is going in the future?
Okay, that covers a lot. So we are but a small part in the community. We're one of 5 lobster dealers here in Stonington. We're on the smaller side with only 40 boats that kind of sell to us throughout the year. But it's really what keeps our part of the town going. You know, Stonington is really mainly known for lobster, and being a fishing town. So every part of the community kind of comes through the lobster industry. Last year, I guess kind of jumping right in to what we've been dealing with the last year, we thought we were prepared. I guess I should start by saying that. My brother took a really active role when we took over the business in 2018 to kind of look further ahead, and kind of start planning and thinking about these bigger picture things, like what the wharf needed, what the fishermen needed, what we needed to be sustainable, even though we were small, so that our family business could keep going through the generations. And one of the things we really thought about was, you know, the rising tides and kind of where our wharf was sitting and where our docks were sitting. And there was only about, you know, 6 inches when we took over from high tide to the top of our dock. So we took the initiative, which we thought would be helpful, and we raised the dock about 1.5 feet the year before the storm hit. So we thought we were doing well. We thought we were planning ahead. And then when the storm hit, our dock was still underwater. Emma, if you could go to the next slide. Right. So yeah, completely underwater, as you can see. So the building in the middle is our new-ish bait shed or area, and that is what was raised about 1.5 feet from where it sat originally. And when the storm hit, it just was about 1 foot underwater that you were walking through all along the dock. So we were shocked, kind of disappointed that our plans to not have to deal with this and by going higher didn't really work out. But it showed us, you know, the might of the ocean, and it happened to be coming right in our little cove. We thought we would be a little more protected over here in Burnt Cove, but that it did not go that way. So one of the things that you can see in the picture, besides all of the water, which is, I haven't looked at these in a while. This is very depressing. It doesn't look like this now, though, I promise. So what you can see, though, is if you look off to the left a little bit, you'll see like the orange and blue and gray totes, bait totes. So what we ended up doing halfway through the storm when the tide switched was loading all of those totes on top of our decking to try to hold it down. The initial kind of hitting up against us lifted all of our pilings that were holding the dock down. They came off of their like anchors that they were anchored into the ground with. So our dock was kind of looked like a roller coaster, kind of. It was kind of wavy. So with the help of a bunch of our fishermen that came over that day, because they were also worried and watching boats and everything like that, we managed to get a bunch of whatever heavy stuff we could find to set on top of the planking. So we didn't end up losing any of the actual planking of the dock, which we were very, very lucky in that respect. But we did have almost all of the new pilings that we put in just 8 months prior come out of their respective holes that were holding everything in. So, and I guess from there, maybe I should talk about kind of what we did.
That would be great, Christina. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for keeping me on track. Just staring at this, I could literally just tell you every little thing that was going on while these waves were hitting. So once the storm passed, well, then we got another one, but that's a whole other issue. But so in general, we just kind of all, I mean, commiserated together for a while as a community, as most of us did. I mean, Millbridge, and I mean, I know everybody was hit pretty crazy. But we luckily just have a really close-knit community. So even while, like I was saying, while this was happening, people were coming and trying to figure out like what we could do. Or was there anything we could do? I mean, people were trying to tie ropes to things. So afterwards, like all of our fishermen that sell to us came down, all of our neighbors, and we all were just trying to problem solve. Like we need to be ready to go in months for the next fishing season. So where can we get help? What can we do? Thankfully, some awesome people at Island Institute actually reached out and helped us find some resources, and were some resources. But then just community members. I mean, my husband had an excavator, so he brought it down and he literally held up half of the wharf while we got underneath there. We had the barges come in. I mean, whenever they could. They had a free day here in between jobs, so they came in and helped. But we've tried to plan ahead again, which we're crossing our fingers that we did really good this time. So I don't have a picture of it here, but where the totes are stacked right there in the picture, where the planking kind of leads out into the water, we got everything reset, so it's almost completely flat again. But this time around, we have added mooring rock anchors underneath of the dock. So there is like mooring chain up around giant I-beams down through the dock out further, and about 25-foot intervals, there is a giant like 2-ton mooring rock. So hopefully, if one of these storms happens again, which we know now that it most likely will at some point in our lifetime, hopefully the dock may still get battered, but it won't raise up like it did this last time. Or that's our hope. That's our planning. And we're hoping also the little building that has the pass at your own risk sign, that next month is getting raised up about 1.5 feet, and all new like steel beams and stuff are going underneath it. So we are still rebuilding a year later and still kind of figuring things out, but we're working on it, and we're trying with the help of some pretty awesome people in the community.
That's great, Christina. Thank you so much. And I can only imagine how you must have felt seeing these storms hit after making these resilience investments, but appreciate the stick-to-itiveness of both your company and the community as they navigate this next challenge to make sure that Fifields is there for the long haul.
Yeah, no, thank you. We thought we had it, but you know, that's the way Mother Nature works.
So next we'll move on to Amity. Amity, could you talk a little bit about your family, and the wharf's experience with these storms? I know it's a challenging situation, but maybe talk a little bit about Chipman's, the role it plays in the community, and then the challenges that you were faced with both during and in the year since the storms.
Hi, thanks, Sam. I'm Amity Chipman. I'm one of the owners of Chipman's Wharf in Millbridge. I want to thank the Island Institute for giving us the opportunity to share our story. In 2001, we purchased the land where brothers Chris and Jason, along with their father John, all three are former full-time commercial fishermen. They built the wharf with their own hands. Some of the community members, the fishermen, came to help us. We are a working waterfront along the Narragansett Bay. We provide a buying station for about 30 fishermen. We are also a tourist destination in our local fishing community with a seafood market, and we serve lunch there during the busier season. And people are able to see what a true working waterfront looks like. On January 10th, my sister-in-law called me and she said, "It's gone." I said, "What's gone?" And she said, "The wharf is gone." I looked out my window. I live further up the river from the wharf. And I could see the pieces of the wharf drifting by. It was heartbreaking to see that. All of the hard work of building that from the ground up was washed away in literally seconds. We lost our entire wooden structure. It was 20 feet wide by 106 feet long. It had a 20 by 40 foot bait shed at the end. We lost it before high tide. a wave just came along and took the whole structure, and it floated off like a wooden barge. Our family was in complete shock and disbelief. That afternoon, the fishing community showed up for us. 800 traps were stored on the trap part of the wharf, and all of those were washed away from the storm surge. They were in a big pile, and those fishermen just got to work. The traps were in water. They were wading into the water, picking them up, putting them on trailers and getting them to a different storage area. The next morning, I drove down to the wharf and you could barely get into the driveway. There were dump trucks, excavators, all kinds of people came to help us clean up. Sorry, this is bringing back a lot of emotions. We knew another storm was predicted in a few days, so we had to get to work quickly to clear the debris. All of our pilings were left still in the water. Some of them were broken off, so we had to get those out. We were fearful that the next storm may cause more damage to other areas with large pieces floating. Within days, the Island Institute was there for the businesses. They were holding Zoom meetings, giving us resources, information, just a real big support for our business. They did an amazing grant for $5,000 that were easy to apply for. And then a few weeks later, we got another $5,000. So we can't thank them enough for the support to our family. After the initial shock of losing the wharf, we went into planning mode. We spoke with an engineer at Haley Ward and made a plan of how we can build a more resilient structure. We met with our insurance company. The adjusters came and they said that there was no insurance coverage due to storm surge being the cause of the destruction. FEMA came to our town to assess the damage to the coast. They met with us and they told us that the SBA was going to be our help, that they would give us a low interest loan. And because we were a private business, we were not eligible for any FEMA funds themselves. We started the loan process in March. It was an extremely frustrating process. I would give them information. I wouldn't hear from them for a month. It was very frustrating. 8 months later in October, we were told that we were not eligible for the 4% interest loan, that they were offering unless we put our personal homes up for collateral. The owners were not comfortable doing this, and so we decided not to go that route. In April, the state passed funding for the Working Waterfront Resilient Grant. We applied for that, and thankfully we received $271,000, which we estimate to be half of the cost to rebuild. This grant is a 1-to-1 ratio grant that the state will reimburse 50% of the cost that we put in to rebuild it. In the spring, we were scrambling to try to rebuild, to make a temporary buying station. Our fishermen were setting their traps and we needed to do something to service them. We've got a new hoist installed so that we could offload and onload product to the boats. And we had to install electricity to the wharf. There was a lot of excavation to even get to access the end of the wharf because so much of it had eroded away. We spoke with the engineer and he recommended raising the structure 42 inches. He used the 100-year flood map prediction map, and that's what he felt comfortable would be for raising the structure. He also suggested changing the structure from a longer, narrower structure of pilings to a shorter, wider structure with crib work. The crib work would be filled with rocks, and then there is a concrete top. It will be the same square footage as before, but the shorter and wider structure will be able to withstand the southeast directions surge and wind that we would get like we did during this storm. We were able to rebuild the existing crib that was at the end. We raised that 42 inches, and rather than doing planking on the top of that, we chose to do a concrete top to make it heavier, because basically, as you can see in that first picture, off to the right of the wharf, that was the wooden structure that we lost. It just floated away like a large barge. So that was at the end of the wharf with a building at the end. So that whole piece had gone. We also installed a concrete barrier wall on the southeast side of the solid causeway. So in that picture, you can see where the excavator is at the end. From that point back to land is a solid causeway. So we did a wall there to allow kind of a breakwater for the storm surge that comes over to try to keep erosion from happening. And it also allowed us to raise the solid causeway to the height of the new wharf, so it was easily accessible. This year has been very difficult for our family. It's been hard to service the fishermen. The boats are not able to access the end of the wharf for 2 hours on either side of the low tide. So basically the boats can't reach the end where it's not as long as it used to be. So they have to use the public pier. And we have a truck that goes down to land their catch there and bring it back to our facility. And we also will take bait and things like that that the fishermen need down there. So it's been a challenging fishing season for our business. This spring, we plan to extend the wharf further using crib work as suggested. And hopefully we can get a building structure at the end so that we have a buying station and a place to store bait at the end of the wharf out of the weather. This year has been very difficult for our family. It's been a huge financial strain. We've been dealing with time constraints, trying to work around the tides when we're rebuilding. Plus, we're doing the work ourselves, and there are also full-time fishermen, so it makes it difficult to find the time. However, with the help of our fishermen, the community, the Working Waterfront Resilient Grant from the state and the Island Institute, we will persevere. We'll keep working to rebuild a more resilient wharf that will hopefully withstand for many generations.
Amity, thank you so much for sharing your heart-wrenching story. I can only imagine how you and your family were feeling and have felt since these storms, and doubly so with the frustrations in funding. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. This year anniversary really brings back all of those memories.
I appreciate you joining us. I know how this can feel, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Derek, if we could hear from you and hear a little bit about Thurston's and what you experienced and how the company has been doing since these storms and how you see things moving forward.
Thank you, Sam. Thurston's Lobster Pound is a 5th generation lobster buying station for my wife's family. We buy from 25 fishermen currently. My wife, Christina, and I have moved back around 12 years ago to start running the business for her parents. And in that time, when we started moving back, we started rebuilding the business from the condition it was in at the time. We started then building retaining walls and trying to rebuild the business to be a stronger business to help rebuild the way it was then. Since then, we have grown and been able to retain some fishermen from moving to selling to trucks at a town pier, and try to keep kind of a facility that is historically the way it has been in the harbor. I guess leading up to the storms, during that first storm, we experienced a lot of the same things that Christina and Amity did, with lifting of structures and lot of utilities got displaced. We had the main utility room that is below our restaurant that got inundated with water from coming up through the floor and reaching all the way to the ceiling with the pressure that came up through. So it inundated our electrical, communications, and camera systems. So along with disturbing 100+ pilings throughout the facility, and then afterwards realizing we had a 20 by 100-foot section of wharf that wasn't repairable. So with this facility, some of the older buildings were built in the late 1800s, and the elevation of those buildings is still the same, along with a portion of the wharf between the main part of the wharf and the restaurant. The section you're looking at on the left is some deck sheathing that was lifted from the newer part of the wharf that is actually at the higher elevation, about 1.5 feet from the older part of the wharf. This wharf sustained deck sheathing issues. There was a couple headers that got cracked from the pressure of lifting. So it sustained the storm better than the rest of the facility. So under the older buildings and the older part of the wharf, which to the right is a picture of an elevation of the wharf that is at the lower height. So with that part of the facility, not only were decking and pilings lifted from their pinnings, there was a lot of movement and braces, and created the whole structure just to be deemed useless, essentially. So immediately after that storm, we started rebuilding to try to get at least functional for the fishermen we had during that winter season, to get at least access through on the deck sheathing over to the other main hoist, to allow our fishermen to continue to work during that season, and to think about what to do coming for the spring to get our utilities up and going for the restaurant for that season. So part of that process, we needed some immediate help, which the Island Institute did help us with, to get some lumber. We needed to get access down to the wharf. The main thoroughfare down into the wharf was lifted about 1.5 feet. So we spent the next month or so trying to get a lot of those pilings put in place. And unfortunately, when that next tide came in and we had already fixed a few pilings, we ended up getting lifted again. And so we got to do a few sections twice during that storm. And you can see on this picture to the left, this is under our restaurant and bar area, where it lifted a lot of the structure, and a lot of the utilities got affected in that area. To the right, you can see our restaurant and lower dining area, which is completely underwater. A lot of this debris is from a building next door that was on a wharf that went into the water. So we started to rebuild to get functional for the season, but then we also were trying to figure out how and what we would do moving forward. And like Amity had said, we looked towards insurance. We had 3 different types of coverage. We had a basic insurance coverage, a force-placed flood insurance coverage through the bank, and an additional piers and docks coverage. So the standard coverage paid nothing out through any of the damages. The force flood insurance paid nothing out because it was wind-driven water and not a flood, according to them. So that was discouraging. The added piers and docks insurance, we did get some coverage from that, but it was around 20% of the damage we experienced throughout the facility. And that insurance we had been paying for at that time was $32,000 a year, which now currently we cannot get insurance like that. It's probably $90,000 a year, which just is not even feasible for us to do. So at this point, we're self-insuring besides again, force flood insurance that will cover nothing for us. We have no rivers or streams that would flood us. The only thing we have is the ocean, and they don't deem flooding of the ocean to be an impact to us. So after determining, trying to figure out what to rebuild and what we could rebuild, we did work through and was able to also get a Working Waterfront grant. So we submitted for what we felt we could contribute with our portion of insurance and additional loans to try and make ourselves more resilient and functional. It still wasn't enough to fully rebuild from what was done before. So it was around 225,000, I believe, is the number, was the matching fund. Even though we have upwards of total cost is, I think, over 600,000 for damage from areas of stuff that were broken. So it was kind of hard. We wanted to start rebuilding, but we had to wait until we knew we were able to get funding, at least matching, before we could start that process. And into that process, part of that cost is getting permitting, and we have gotten permitting now, and now we have a contractor lined up to start rebuilding the large portion of the wharf that needs to come down and be put back up. So we are trying to raise and fix that part of the wharf back up to the new height of the rest of the structure and allow that area to be more resilient. It's not feasible for us to lift some of the older buildings. One is a bait shed, two-story bait shed or shops above for our fishermen. And the other one is shops and office space. It's just not practical for us to lift those buildings. So the only thing we will be trying to do is try to add extra structure and anchors to the ledge below and try to just hold it down the best we can. And part of what we'd like to do, if we can, after a lot of the structure is rebuilt, is try to have enough left over to put a little bit of erosion control in for our roadway, which is, we did start putting some in a couple of years back on a portion of the roadway, but we do need additional around 100 feet of more erosion control along that entranceway.
Derek, thank you so much. I can only imagine the laundry list of challenges that remain for rebuilding, and it's hard enough to make a living on and from the water without storms like this. So appreciate you sharing your story. Lissa, I think this is a great opportunity to transition over to you. And we've heard mention of engineering firms and studies and steps that people have taken. Could you talk a little bit about how you envision engineering playing a role or not, and what steps folks have been taking, what you've been hearing from you from your professional colleagues around next steps for the wards and what can be done?
Yes, thank you, Sam, certainly. And thanks to the Island Institute for putting on the webinar series, and for the other panelists here today. It is heartbreaking, to say the least, and hard to follow with an engineering story. So let's give it a go. So yes, my name is Lissa Robinson. I've been in the engineering field for about 36 years. And I think there comes a point in time when we maybe say more than 35 years or more than 30 years. So I think I'm getting to that point. I work with a company called GEI Consultants. There are other engineering firms in the state who also do great work in this setting. I'd like to give a shout out to my colleagues who really I'm standing on their shoulders because this is really specialty work when we're working in the coastal and marine setting. There are different practice elements. So there are structural engineers, water resource engineers who do the hydraulic modeling and wave analysis, permitting, planning, landscape architecture, and other perspectives that feed in. We can go to the next slide. So we're just going to be talking a little bit about the engineering perspective. This doesn't mean that you need an engineer for every project, but there are elements that can sometimes be helpful. And the value in bringing in an engineer is to really share the risk and to think about the soils, the structures, the materials, and this specialty work. So I'm not promoting engineering on all projects. I'm just kind of describing what we see and what we do. I love this picture of the fishing shacks in South Portland with Portland Headlight in the background. I grabbed this off the internet, so credit to Jack Bjorn. It was a story map. There are many story maps around the state that are telling these stories with incredible imagery. So we can go on to the next slide. So there's a framework to the different types of studies that these specialists and engineers and planners and architects can work on. And these are the steps that we're seeing that are helpful for the coastal setting. And so I'm just going to go through each one and give a little bit of information that helps describe these areas of expertise. So staying on this slide, I'm just going to click through my notes here. Planning, when we think about a planning level study, we're really going out and looking at existing conditions. We're thinking about water surface elevations today, in the future. We're also thinking about storm surge and sea level rise. Many of us will notice that when we have a storm, we'll get a first high tide. And if the storm is lingering, that second high tide is going to be even a bigger whopper. And so we think about inspecting structures, having inspections documenting the condition of piles, either after a storm event or just today. We evaluate the need for a site survey, how much information is available for the site, both in the upland environment and in the bathymetric setting, the surface below the water. And then we think about hydraulic modeling needs. Do we understand the inundation for kind of regular events? And then for an event like the one we had in January, what does that inundation look like? How is the site impacted by waves? How would the site be impacted by surge and sea level rise out into the future? And then the next step might be a site investigation where we really go out and put eyes on the ground. We might perform that site survey. We might look at site constraints. Do we know where the property lines are? Do we have good access? We're working in a water environment where access can be tricky. Are there overhead power lines? Are there underground utilities? For example, some of the utility discussion that we heard from the wharf owners that are here today. There are also sensitive features that we need to be mindful about. We are in this natural resource industry where there are shellfish. There's also eelgrass and other kind of sensitive receptors that can really require some thought, and that may in fact require environmental review. Then we think about the design element, whether this is a rebuild or a new build. There's certainly thought that goes into that. Aligning the design with the intended use. Is it going to be a pedestrian walkway, or do we need to take dump trucks and other trucks with full loads out on these structures? And that will inform the structure design, not only the structure design, but the foundation of that particular design. Do the piles need to be extended to bedrock? Is there bedrock present at the site, or is it soil, deep clays? So those all kind of are different factors that can impact the design. And then kind of the need for structural calculations. Do we need to understand the loads? Do design drawings need to be prepared and handed into the different local, state, and federal regulatory agencies. Then really one thing that I like to think about are the materials that are being used in that coastal environment. Are they suitable? Sometimes we have seen piles that are trees with the bark still on them. They are certainly had a place in history. And nowadays we are using treated piles and brackets, materials that really are suitable and can withstand salt water and the beating that these structures take. Another part of design really also is to get ready for bidding and to prepare bid documents and specifications. This helps align the design with the final product. It helps have consistency in the contractor responses. And then information about permitting as well. So let's see, I'm getting a little bit of. So let's see, design costs before we leave design. Design costs are typically 10% of construction costs, although that can vary. And that's design cost when you get an engineer on board. Again, I'm not saying that every project requires an engineer, but again, it's to share that risk of the longevity of the site. So with respect to permitting, again, local, state, and federal regulatory requirements, we're building in a sensitive setting. For the local, every town is different. That's what makes Maine a very fun and interesting place to live. There may be planning board applications. There might be a flood hazard development permit that's required, or it might be a building permit through the code enforcement officer. So I think it takes communication, talking with your other wharf owners that maybe in your town or in other areas of the state, calling people. I know this all takes time out of a already busy schedule and takes away from doing the job that you really want to be doing, that is your livelihood. In terms of the state, there are some recent advances in the permit by rule process, which is a shorter version of the Natural Resources Protection Act. In certain situations, the topic of submerged land lease comes up, and that is done through the Maine Bureau of Parks and Lands. So those are kind of some areas where the state has some regulatory authority in the coastal setting. And then there's Army Corps of Engineers for the federal, Maine General and the Maine General Permit. So historically, there's been a partnership with Maine DEP that has kind of facilitated that process, but that could change. So we'll see where that is headed. Let's see, and then from permitting, we talk about bidding, and there's you can go into the bidding yourself, and that is totally fine. There's typically a pre-bid meeting and then a review of bids. And I think with respect to bidding, one thing that's definitely noticeable is it is really helpful when the contractors are experienced and skilled in working in the coastal or waterfront setting. So again, communication with other communities who have gone through this, finding out what contractors have worked in the coastal setting, and making sure that the materials they're using aren't going to rust and fail. So then we get into construction, and certainly the idea is to make sure what is being built is what was intended to be built. And sometimes engineers are brought in, sometimes they aren't. It depends on the size of the project. So there might be no oversight from an engineer. There might be minimal oversight where an engineer might be present at the kickoff meeting, do a couple of site visits, and then be present at the final for the final meeting. And again, it's to make sure the design, the plan was built in accordance with the intention. And then for bigger projects, certainly there can be 100% engineer presence. There are some large projects in Maine that are asking for that type of commitment. So again, it comes down to the role of risk. How much is an owner willing to take on themselves? How much time do they have? And how much do they want to share the risk with another partner, be that an engineer? And so if we can go to the next slide. This here is just an example you can see the float that's up higher than the ground level. So the gangplank is going down to ground level. So sometimes there are issues with tying into uplands when we're redoing some of these wharfs and raising their elevations to make sure we're tying into the upland. So that's just the example there. A credit to Portland Press Herald on that. This was Henry Allen's seafood site on January 13th. We can go to the next slide. Love seeing where my fellow panelists are from. So I'm sitting in Portland, but they're sitting in Stonington, Bass Harbor, and Millbridge. A beautiful area of the state. So as a brief summary, in terms of considerations when rebuilding in the coastal setting, there are significant factors involved for private wharf owners as well as commercial wharf owners. Again, the role of risk, schedule is a big one. We're just hearing from Derek that it's taken a year. That's a long time. So readiness for upcoming seasons, certainly costs. We've heard a little bit about costs and grant funding. And grant funding has been incredible in Maine. Really, the state has stepped up, but there is a match, and that can be really burdensome and onerous for owners. And then availability of materials, people, your time, the wharf owner's time, engineers, contractors. There has been an incredible backlog, and we're working hard in our own firm to go up to that UMO career fair and find the new engineers who are just graduating from programs and are willing to come in and stay in Maine and work in Maine. So we're feeling it on our end, and I know that the wharf owners are feeling it on their end. So if we go to the next slide, I think the state is taking action. It may not feel like it at times, but I think it's incredibly exciting. You know, starting with the governor's office, there's a commission for the infrastructure rebuilding and resiliency just issued an interim report that has led to some legislation. And certainly the Island Institute's role in putting on these webinars. Maine Sea Grant has gone and done community sessions. We have new permitting that is being expedited through PBR. We're now being allowed to raise for these wharfs by 4 feet. So that's a big change. There are things that are going on. So again, I love this idea of community, talking with other people, find out what's going on, interact with the Island Institute, call the governor's office. I think that there is remarkably quite a lot going on. So Sam, with that, I think we can go to the next slide and I'll hand it back to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lissa. And just for everyone, we will share all of these resources and these slides with folks afterwards. I think it's critical to understand where, in addition to the Island Institute and other organizations, where you can go for more resources. So that is a lot to take under consideration as a wharf owner when you're thinking through engineering or not and all of the steps engaged in that process. If I could ask our panelists to just join back on with their camera so we can see your faces. Great, thank you all so much. So there was a lot just laid out there. Derek, Amity, Christina, if you could share what your biggest challenge has been over this last year so folks can be aware of not just the spread of challenges, but where have things moved the slowest, or where have you felt the most stuck in moving forward towards rebuilding to resilience with your wharves and your businesses? And we'll start with you, Christina.
That's kind of hard to pinpoint just one thing. Because in the moment, like when it was happening, it was like you could only focus on like one, like what could you do like right that second. But I think, I mean, thankfully we had a lot of help with our permitting and all of that. Our town was really good about that, helping us get that figured out. I think maybe just, sorry, I'm looking out my window because it's literally right there. What talking about? Maybe supplies, I think right off the bat was probably the first thing. And we only have one barge I don't know if down east, if you guys have that same problem. But there's just one guy, and one barge, and there was like 25 docks, that needed help, with piling. So I think that was probably our biggest, like, I have no idea when he's gonna get here type of thing. And then the money, obviously, to pay for it. But yeah, first off the top of my head, I would say barge, and barge work was hard.
I know that there was a backlog on marine construction even
Yeah.
before, so I can only imagine this
So
is
much.
how this has impacted things. Amity, what about from your perspective and Chipman's? Oh, Amity, could I ask you to come off mute?
Sorry. Yes, the supplies were an issue. We had to wait for pressure treated supplies to be able to get to us. We also had time constraints. We were working around the tide, and we needed to have larger tides in order to be able to access the end, to do the work. The time constraints, we're trying to do a lot of it ourselves just to save money, because money is a huge piece of it. And it's also a bad time of year for wharf owners. You're talking the spring, there's not a lot of fishermen going out. So, that has been a huge piece as well. And, the time constraint to get something functioning in a short amount of time so that, those boats are starting, they're setting their traps. We need to be able to service our fishermen. So I'd say those were our biggest issues.
Thank you for sharing, Amity. And Derek, from your perspective at Thurston's.
I would agree that the timing, having the time available while you're trying to run a business, to put a full-time job into doing repairs and finding the help to help you do it. Like Amity says, we try to do a lot of the stuff ourselves because it's sometimes cost prohibitive to hire some of the bigger companies to come in and help you. So then that, with the timing and finding the funding to do the repairs is really the most difficult part.
Great, thank you. And I know we're running short on time today, but I wanted to ask one question on a more hopeful note. You all touched on the reaction and the response of your community as part of this. Derek, maybe we'll start with you and talk a little bit more about how the community has engaged in this and in support of your business since the storms.
Immediately when we started doing repairs, we did hire on and paid some of our fishermen that were not fishing to come in and help us get decking and stuff put back down. They were happy to help. They were there when we needed them to get things moving. So that initial jump back in and get things put back together was priceless.
Yeah. And Amity from Millbridge and.
Yes, it was very humbling to see the fishing community surround us. They're like family, and when you're hurting, they're there for you. So it really has been unbelievable. The fishermen came, they helped clean up, they brought skiffs to scour the shores. It's just, they really support you when you're in need.
Yeah, and Christina in Stonington.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. You hope that, people will want to come and help you, but you don't really know until something like that happens. And then, I mean, people are just driving in, jumping out of vehicles, just trying to be helpful. I think just our fishermen, like I talked about, also our family coming together, and then just our town officials were out and about, helping. Our town trucks are, I feel like every person was out and about in the following days, just doing whatever they could. So
Thank you all so much. I apologize if we haven't had a chance to get to your question live. We will make sure that we respond directly to your questions that you have already put in chat, or if you have follow-up questions that you would like to share, please don't hesitate. My email address and my colleague's email address is right on the website, sbelknap@islandinstitute.org. Please feel free to reach out, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered as part of our broader follow-up. So thank you so much, Lissa. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much, Amity, for joining us today and sharing your challenging stories. But I think leaving it on the note that our communities, our strongest asset are our people, and they come together in moments of trial and tribulation to address these challenges head on. So for all of you who've joined us today, thank you so much. This recording will be shared with you as we send out the follow-up material, in addition to any of the resources that we mentioned, and links to our storm response page. Thank you for joining us today and for your continual support for the islands and coastal communities of Maine. Thank you for supporting us as an organization as we boldly navigate climate and economic change with island and coastal communities to expand opportunities and deliver solutions. All of our resources on these webinars can be found at our storm response link in our website, islandinstitute.org. And if you're interested in learning more about a particular topic germane to Maine's island and coastal communities, please reach out and let us know, and we can work to get another webinar on the books on those topics. Thank you all so much, and thank you again to our panelists for joining us and sharing their experiences today. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.